Hey up! Now then, how are you doing? Welcome back to the Yorkshire Bike Mechanics YouTube channel. My name's Dave K. I hope you're all well and you're having a good week. And if someone were to come up to you this afternoon and say, out of all the e-bikes that are out there at the minute, which one would you see the most of? Well, if they asked me, my answer would be the Trek Rail. There is loads and loads of Trek Rails about, and they're a brilliant bike and they're nice to work on. But there are certain things on the Trek Rail that you need to keep an eye on. So if you've got a Trek Rail and you want to keep it up to scratch, then this is the video for you. Let's crack on. So the Trek Rail is a lovely bike. It's a brilliant bike, a really good all-rounder. A good ride, and it's nice and powerful. This one's a new smart motor, so it's fairly recent. But like any e-bike, they take a lot of looking after, a lot more than a standard analog bike. Now, one of the most important things that you need to keep on top of on an e-bike is your suspension bearings. One of the reasons why is because there's quite a lot of torque going through the chain, through the back cassette, and into the back end of the frame, into this rear triangle. And there's such a lot of pressure put on these pivot points that they wear very, very quickly. This just doesn't apply to the Trek Rail, it applies to nearly all e-bikes. And like I say, I would do this at round about 6 months. Every 6 months, I would certainly look at your suspension bearings. Now you might be thinking, God, that's not a long time. 6 months, they should last longer than that. And they probably will. But if there's something wrong, or there's a creak or something like that, and you're not sure of where it's coming from, one of the first things that you should look at is the suspension bearings. If you leave them too long, and the C's in the housings, you will struggle to get them out. So that's one of the main reasons why you should look at your bearings often. Now this particular bike, it's coming for a full service, but as part of that is mentioned that there's a creak. Now looking at the bike, it looks generally, it's in good condition. It's a little bit dirty, but apart from that, it's not too bad. Now I suspect the type of creak that I'm hearing really is probably from this bottom end somewhere. Now, this particular bottom pivot here is quite susceptible to wear on a rail. Not sure why, but it is, and it needs looking at more than anything else. So, what we're going to do is we're going to do a full suspension bearing replacement on this Trek Rail, and we'll start with the bottom end. So, well, first thing that we need to do is we need to take these crank arms off, take the chainring off, and then we can go from there. It's fairly easy to do. I'm not going to do too much of a video on getting these off because I know that you probably know how to do it anyway. So they come off like that. You just take the 8mm bolt out at the end. You need a crank remover. I'll get this off and then I'll come back. Okay, so we've got the crank arm off. Next thing to do is, if there's a chain guide anywhere up there, then that needs taking off. Next thing to need to do is undo this bolt. Now we use a specific tool, and it's actually made by cyclists, and it's for this particular motor. It's for a Gen 4. It's got a bolt in the centre, and that actually screws into the end of the crankshaft, and then that stops it from jumping out of these notches. So we just put that in there. Just screw it in till it tightens up. That's it, and then it's not going to actually fall out of these notches. And these come off in the opposite direction. So instead of lefty loosey, righty tight, it's opposite way on these. Okay, so go that way to undo it. Now we need that chainring off to actually get to this particular suspension bolt here. I'm going to start on this suspension bolt because I suspect this is the one that's actually got the most damage to it. It's an 8mm bolt. Okay, you need to be careful when you're taking these out because sometimes they can be really, really tight in, and that's probably one of the good reasons that you need to take it out quite often, every 6 months, and then it don't get chance to seize. So we'll take his 8mm Allen key and we'll bob it in the other side, and we undo that, and it should actually come out fairly easily. If you feel any restriction or you feel as though it's not actually coming out, then you need to stop, because if you carry on going and it's really, really stiff, you're going to actually damage these particular threads on this end. So if it's not coming out easily, stop. So this one's coming out fairly easily. There's a little retaining nut on that end. Okay, and I can see it's coming out. It's pretty black. There's a little bit of wear on that pivot, I can see there. I don't know whether you can see that. Okay, let's just move this to one side. Just be careful because the sensor, the wheel magnet sensor's there. So there's two spaces, one on the either side on the inside. So be careful not to, if you lose those, you'll have a job finding more. That one's broke, look. That one's broke, that one. We're going to have to replace that one. So, look at state of that. Look how black and rusty that is inside. And that's where, that's where his creak's coming from, you can guarantee it. That bearing is absolutely gone. It doesn't actually turn or anything. When you try and put your finger in, it doesn't turn. Look how black it is inside. I'll put a photograph on the screen and you can actually see what it's like inside. So we know definitely these need replacing. They're actually gone. So if them are like that, then at this point it's probably worth replacing the rest. So we need to replace the others as well. But let's do this one first. We need to be careful, obviously, because of these cables. There's the hose there and the cable for the sensor there. So we need to be careful not to actually damage those. And there's a gear cable on the other side. So before we go any further on this, I want to talk to you a little bit about bearings. We've got actually a bearing kit for this bike here, and there's every bearing that you're going to need for the whole suspension system on this bike, got the whole pivots. So a lot of people say to me, what's the difference between a good bearing and a bad bearing? Well, mainly is the cost. You will pay more for a better bearing than you obviously will for a cheaper bearing. And the reason is because expensive bearings are made to a higher tolerance, and that's why they're more expensive. When bearing manufacturers manufacture a good bearing, what they'll tend to do is every few thousand runs or whatever that might be of bearings, they will stop the machine, they will check all the tooling, they'll make sure all the tooling's nice and sharp, and by doing that, the result will be a better bearing. And because all the tooling's looked at and it's changed more often, that's why it's more expensive, because it costs more to produce. But at the end of the day, you get a better bearing. Now, the higher end bearings, we tend to try and use enduro bearings if we can. And enduro bearings mainly come in two kind of flavours. So you've got an ABEC 3 and an ABEC 5. Now the ABEC 5 is a better quality bearing than the ABEC 3. So it may be that in certain circumstances that you want to use the better bearing like the ABEC 5 in certain situations. So where you need a higher tolerance bearing, where there's more stress, then you might want to use an ABEC 5 bearing. Maybe in your wheels, in the hubs, you might want to use an ABEC 3. But generally speaking, the more money you pay for bearings, the better quality they are. And that's the main difference between cheap bearings and expensive bearings. So we've got us bearing kit here. So what the first thing that we need to do basically is we need to get these old bearings out of this housing so we can actually put new ones in. Now this is where sometimes it can get a little bit cumbersome in certain ways, because in this particular case, if you can imagine, getting these two bearings out of this particular housing is obviously a little bit of a task, because you don't want to damage the housing. You want to get these bearings out. There's a sleeve in the middle, by the way, which parts these bearings. These bearings are quite wide. They're I think they're a 10mm bearing, these, so they're actually quite wide. And they're actually quite tight in that housing, so they can take a little bit of getting out. Now, the best way to get these particular bearings out, there's one or two ways. What we can use is we can use a brass drift, and we can go from this side and get against the inside, and we can tap this bearing out. And we can do the same with the other side. That's probably one of the most favourite ways to do it. And by doing that, if you're careful, you can get them out. There's been no damage at all. It's perfectly acceptable to do it that way. So the other way is to use a slide puller, whereas we put a little tool on the inside and we actually use it to slide. In fact, I'll get one and show you what it's like. So this is a blind bearing puller. This actually goes, if you can see it, this actually goes on the inside of the bearing. There's a little lip there, and then you screw that on there, put that behind your bearing, and then tighten that up, and it expands at the end and locks itself in. Now, these are brilliant things if you've got a little bit of a gap at the back of the bearing, so you can actually get that lip in, and then you use that to pull the bearing out of its housing. It's quite an effective tool, and we use it such a lot, but I'm not particularly sure in this case it's going to be what we need, purely and simply because there's no gap. There's no like little space at the back of the bearing to actually get them lips in place, and so we're going to have to use a drift in this particular case. So we'll use a brass drift, and that's the best way of getting it out, but we need to be careful. So we need a decent brass drift like this one nice and flat on the end, so we can actually get that behind the bearing there like that. And we need to very carefully take us hammer and just gradually knock that bearing out at the other side. You'll feel when that bearing is actually starting to move. If it's not moving at all and it's too difficult and you're hitting it hard, then stop, because chances are you're probably going to damage something. Now you can see I'm being very careful, just moving the drift round, moving it on the bottom of the bearing, the top of the bearing, round the side of the bearing, just to evenly press that bearing out. Okay, and that's that one out. Now, one of the main reasons why we're doing this every 6 months is because if you leave it much longer and that is difficult to get out, the chances are that you could push the inner race of the bearing out before the outer race. That leave the outer race in the housing, which is very difficult to get out. So there's the sleeve. Now what we can do is move to the other side and easily push this bearing out, the same as what we did in the other side. What I think I'll do is, now that we've got a gap at the back, it'll give me a chance to show you how the blind bearing puller works. Sometimes it take a bit of getting in. Okay, and you push that in till it gets to the other side. That's it. And then you can screw that in to lock it behind the bearing. Not too tight, just to lock it in place so it's not moving. Okay, so we've got us as tool screwed in the end. That's nice and locked behind the bearing. And we just use it to slide. And it comes out like that. Now that is one of a couple of methods we can use to get bearings out of the housing, but in order to use this, like I said before, you need that gap behind the bearing. If you want to use a drift, that's fine. You just need to be very careful that you're actually making sure that you're putting the same amount of force on each side of the bearing so it actually comes out square. This particular puller is great if you can get that gap behind the back of the bearing. So that's that out. The next thing we need to do is obviously clean these surfaces out, give them a good clean, and then we can put some new bearings in. So we've got us 2 new bearings for this particular pivot. The next thing that we need to do is blather it in Antiseize. Okay, this is what we use. We use Shimano Antiseize. It's really good stuff, and we just absolutely put loads and loads all around the edges, just to stop it sticking in there in future. And then when we come to take these bearings out, next time we renew them, then it'll come out fairly easily. The other important thing about putting new bearings in is using the right tool to push them in. And it's important. We have loads of different bearing presses, but it's important that you use the right tool to get them in. It's got to be the same diameter as the outside of the bearing, the one that you're using, so then you get the pressure around the outside and not the inner race, otherwise you'll damage the bearing. So we'll just slot that in there, and we'll gently use the press to actually get it in the right place, and you'll feel it going in nice and square, just gently, and you'll feel it go in nice and square. You shouldn't need to put loads and loads of force on there to hit that in. Just hit it gently. There we are, we're nearly in now. Now this particular bearing sits back a little bit from the front. And you can feel the note change the sound on the hammer when it actually stops. There we are. So that's as far back as it'll go. One brand new bearing in there, nice and safe, nice and easy, and we'll do exactly the same on the other side. But we'll put the sleeve back in first, but we'll give that a clean. Right, so I've put the bearing in the other side. All that leaves us to do now is blather it with grease inside. I'm going to put a new spacer on that side, loads of grease on. It helps if you use a bit of grease so they stay in place. Do the other one on the other side, and then we just need to slide this swinging arm back into place, but holding these spacers in the right angle so they don't slide out. Okay, we'll use some grease tolerant Loctite. Okay, just bob that back in its housing. Get us 8mm Allen key, just do it hand tight for now, and then we'll torque it up to the right settings. Right, so I'll just torque it up to about 28, 29 Newton meters, maximum 30. There we are. Don't need to do any more. Just wipe that excess grease off around there, and that is now done. So that is something that you can probably do at home if you feel competent enough. It's fairly straightforward. Take your time and it's doable, okay? The others on this trek rail are a little bit of a different kettle of fish. We need specific tools to take these bearings out and to put the new bearings in. So them two are done. Now we'll continue with the others. We'll start with a rocker first. Okay, so these here, these two are 5mm and this one's 6mm. The first ones that we need to take out are these two here. Now you need to be careful because there's two tiny spaces behind. So we'll just quickly undo those. They should come out fairly easy. We'll go around and take all those out. Again, keep an eye on the spaces, don't lose the spaces. Once we've got them out, I'll come back. Okay, so that's the rocker out. We've got two bearings left in the frame that go obviously through there. We've got one there, one the other side, and one at the back. Now, this is where you need specific tools to be able to get these bearings out and push the new ones in. You can't go start using sockets and stuff like that to get these out and push new ones in, because you will damage the paint and you could chip the aluminium or cause more damage. So it's always best to use the right tools to actually get those out. So what I'm going to do is we're going to go get these out. We'll do one. Okay, I'll show you how we do one, otherwise this video ends up far too long. I'll show you how we get one out and I'll show you how we get the new one in, and then obviously that will let you know how the rest is done. So let's get it on the bench. These are the 4 bearings that we need to take out, and we're going to use this little tool here, which is one of the best tools we've ever had. We have generally quite a lot of them for different size bearings, as you can see. This one's specific for this size of bearing. So all we basically do is get this bolt, that goes underneath, that goes through there, over the top, just screw it in there, screw that into the bottom part. Now with this particular tool, we can not only take bearings out safely without damage anything, but we can also put them in as well, just as easily as we take them out. So once that's in that position there, we can see that it's actually over the bearing. This is underneath, so we need just something to hold that in place like that. Take a 6mm Allen key over the top and then just gently turn it, and the bearing will come up through the bottom, as you can see. It'll come straight out there without damaging the paint, and it'll just pop out when it's ready to. There we are. Okay, perfect job. All we need to do now is undo that. There's his old one. Get us new bearing. Give it a blow. Put some Antiseize on. Give it a good coat of Antiseize. And then what we do basically, we reverse this on the top. Like that. Put the bolt through. Okay, and that underneath. And then we just tighten that up there, and everything goes in nice and square. Get a 6mm Allen key. Hold it nice and firmly, and everything goes in nice and easy. Straight down. Straight into the housing. There we are. Really nice and easy, straightforward. Okay, that's that one done. Okay, as you can see, perfect. No marks on the paint or anything. Absolutely perfect. So now we need to do that one, and that one, and then we can bob it back on the bike. So I'll do those, and then we'll come back to it when it's ready to go back on the bike. So here's our rocker, all new bearings, 1, 2, 3, 4. As you can see, I've put some new bearings in the frame. I've used exactly the same technique as we did on the lower pivots. We actually drifted those out with a brass drift and then put re-greased up Antiseize, and then put the new bearings back in with a sleeve. I'm going to put a little bit of grease on the outside. That's it, a little bit of grease on the outside. And then there's the spacers which need to go on as well, which are there, okay. One there and one on the other side. And we need to be careful that they actually stay in place while we put this this rocker in where it should be. So we just need to be careful of these spacers. Okay, so we've got our new rocker on. We've got it all lined up. We've got our spacers on. We've got our pin all nice and greased up. All we need to do is just slide it through there. Get us a retainer nut on the other end. A little bit of Loctite. Get us number 6 Allen key. And then just get that in. Just so it's hand tight for now. That's it. Okay. The next one we need to put back is the rocker at the back. Again, there's spaces to go on the inside, so we'll put some grease on there. I've given all them a nice clean. That's it, and then we'll just pop them at the back of there, and then the grease will hold them in the place. Put a bit of grease on there. Okay. A little bit of Loctite on these threads at the other side. And then we'll just bob these bolts back in. I've put a little bit of grease on there as well, just to make it easier for them to go back in. We just need to carefully lift this up into place. Just wait till it finds its own little spot to thread back in. They will go in nice and easy. Just make sure that there's plenty of grease on them. That's it. Again, number 5 Allen key. Just to tighten these up a little bit, not hard at first, and then we'll torque them up a little bit later. Here we are. Okay, so we need to remember that these are only finger tight at the minute, and so are these. These new ones, new bearings that we've put in there for the top of the shock. There is some bearings in the bottom as well, which we'll replace. Very simple process on the bottom. All we need to do is obviously take the shock out, pull those out with this little tool that we used to get the bearings out of the rocker, and then do exactly the same with the new ones and push 2 new ones in. Put the shock back, and then we can connect it all back. So we've got us 2 little spacers here that we're going to put on the inside of there. We've put plenty of grease on there, so they'll should hold in place. We just want to push the shock back up to the top and just carefully just maneuver that into position. Okay, put a little bit of grease on the bolts, put some Loctite on the other side, so we just need to just very carefully locate them in. Get us 5mm Allen key and just tighten those up, just finger tight for now. That's it. Do the same on the other side. That is the whole front end done. We've done the rockers, we've done the bottom 2 pivots, we've done the shocks. The last thing that we need to do on the suspensions is actually the articulate bearings at the back. So let's go back there now. So here we're at the back end. These are the articulate bearings at the back. Fairly easy to replace. Take the axle out. We'll need to take the derailleur off. Now, in his previous videos, we've covered how difficult these UDR derailleur hangers can be. Obviously, they take a little bit of tightening up on the front end, but we've not to over tighten them over that, otherwise you snap them inside. So let's go ahead and take that off. So now we need to take this bearing out, but we need the right tool to do it. So let's get the right size, put that through there, tighten that up, and we'll just very, very carefully pull this one out. There we are. That's that one out. Put tons of Antiseize on it, and then his new bearing can go straight in there. Okay. There we are. That's that one in. And we'll do exactly the same for the other side. Same procedure on the other side. So I've taken the old bearing out the other side and put the new one in. And now what we're going to do is we're going to put the back end back together. Just need to be a little bit careful because these UDR hangers are notorious for snapping. So you need to be careful that you don't over torque it, and it's a left-hand thread, so to tighten it we go to the left. I'm going to take the derailleur off as well because it'll be a little bit easier to get the nut on it, saves messing about. Okay, so I get the nut ready and the washer, and we'll just gradually just work it in with his fingers, bearing in mind that this, don't forget, is a left-hand thread, so we need to be very careful not to cross-thread it. So this particular UDR hanger here, we're going to tighten it up. It specifies 25 Newton meters. Now, this is just a plastic UDR, and my opinion is that if you tighten this up to 25 Newton meters, the chances are it's going to snap. So use your judgment. If it snaps, you're going to have to drill it out, and it's difficult to do. This brings us back now to finishing up. We need to torque all these bolts up that we've just actually hand tightened and left hand tightened. So we start at the back and the dropouts. That one there needs to be 15 Newton meters. This one we've already done here already. But this is 15. This one here needs to be 22 Newton meters. This one at the back needs to be 17. And these two here and the bottom one need to be 10 Newton meters. Okie dokie, I hope that gave you a good idea of how to carry out a bearing service on a Trek rail. It is fairly straightforward, providing that you've got the right tools. If you've got the right tools, then you should be able to do it yourself. It's worth buying those specific bearing tools for those smaller bearings on your rocker arm and on the articulate side on the back. That's worth doing. But all in all, it is doable, and it's worth doing on a regular basis on a Trek rail. This one was squeaking and creaking, and from the look of the bottom pivot bearing, you could understand why that were actually creaking. It were in a bit of a mess. So that's now sorted, all done. I hope you enjoyed it and it kind of inspired you to maybe have a go yourself. Thank you for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Leave us some comments and I'll speak to you soon. Toodle pip.